See the bones? Here you go.
Yeah. From my ass. Eh?
Speak from your ass.
So what you're saying is if for the average student,
Yeah.
the gap is too great to
Right.
make the leap
Right.
into the investigation, into the inquiry,
Yes.
then it's a bit like we have a standardized testing for kids at school, which is supposed to be a diagnostic tool for teachers.
Right.
But it's become so, for those kids who are at the bottom, who actually need the diagnosis so that we can do something
Right.
in terms of their education, the gap is so big for them to leap into the top dot,
Right.
that they don't try.
Right.
And so people don't even go, and some people don't even go and do the test. So if you look at Moshe, and if people are leaving a Amherst with what you think is only 20 to 30% of what there's no wonder that they don't continue if the gap is too big.
Yes, I agree. So many things, again, I think that there were things that were implicit within him, that they were so completely intact within him that he didn't understand how far people were from where he was offering material from. I mean, it's a large part of why I take these basic ideas of what might it mean to cancel gravity, and to break it down and break it down and break it down so that we can start to see some of the elements of what it means to actually find the ability to organize our skeleton so that we can have the experience of canceling gravity. So it's not just a concept, but for a moment we can experience it, and we can experience it in many different ways, so that it's not, I mean, and you can see that how long we've been here for 8 days now, yeah? So it's taken 8 days of foundational material to come to the place that you can now do what happened today, which is a pretty damn good representation of a beginning FI lesson. Yeah, with in other words, the ability that you would have again to go into work with someone, a family member who's losing their sense of balance. Yeah. Someone from the public who's had an injury that affects their ability to find stability within themselves. Someone who's isn't so free to turn one way or the other. Yeah? Someone who doesn't trust the ground under their feet. Yeah? Which is everybody. Everybody. Yeah? So already you have a pretty good representation, and the representation isn't, again, about what you learn point by point as to how to do this, but within this whole thing is the study. You can see I keep asking, what's possible? Let's look at this. So to invite you to have the process for how you could begin to think, because don't have time to say, well, the hand has to go exactly here so that you can sense with your finger up and under the ischial tuberosity in such a way that you can create such and such and such and such. All that is going to have to come out of your own exploration. But I don't think the gap is as big a gap for this very specific question. How do I organize myself so when I work at the table, I can be comfortable and offer the clearest message possible? Yeah? That's not, how do I come to stand in such a way that I can meet the criteria that Feldenkrais had in the Awareness and Movement book? Do I have some ideas about that, and could I help someone generate that lesson for themselves? Yeah. So it's not the big gap. Yeah. There are things that Moshe says when you go through the Amherst material about the 6th or 7th time.
So if you only had, so the question is, if you only had 20 to 30% of the information that you felt was there, what in you enabled you to do that 70% that we have to only do 20 or 30% of?
Well, because I've always been this way. When I was in high school, And my father was a chemical engineer for a paper company, a company that made paper. And we moved every 3 years from one job to the next because his job was, actually my father could possibly be considered one of the first green engineers on the planet. All of the processes that paper mills use today to deal with the waste from the paper making process, my father invented. All the settling ponds, the way that the waste is taken out of the water, the way the water is returned back to the river in such a way that it's the temperature of the river, all the ways that the smokestacks purified and cleaned the air, all those processes, and the process by which the waste is turned into a useful process. I didn't know most of this until my father was eulogized, because the engineer, he never told us. But he also never told us about his experience in Korea. There were many things that he simply couldn't share, right? So when he was eulogized, the engineers told us. My father, I mean, I always knew that he was a brilliant man. I fell a long ways away from that tree, I can tell you. Relative to what his ability to do was. My daughter fell right next to that tree, you know, when it comes to her interest in physics and engineering and science. But anyway, so maybe it skips generations. I have a kinesthetic sense that he wasn't able to have, and an athletic, a coordinated synchrony, another kind of intelligence than he had. But he was the head engineer for the remodel of a paper mill, a $400 million project that came in on time, under budget, with a slide rule. In the days when they had computers that took up rooms, and it took more time to organize the cards than it did to make the calculations on a slide rule, my father built the damn thing with a slide rule. Yeah. And, you know, as far as I know, it's still working today. So, I mean, it's really, none of us really understood this until the engineers in his office, you know, basically brought this to our attention. We just knew that we just traveled a lot. We moved from town to town. So we moved from one town in Louisiana, which was the most fearful and awful personal circumstance, because imagine being, I'm sure you have places here, but in Bogalusa, Louisiana, in the middle of the Deep South in 1960, with all the racial tension that's taking place, and all of the racial tension. So after we moved from the town, we were there for 2.5 years. We were gone for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks after we were gone, there was a black deputy sheriff shot. The black deputy sheriff, my dad saw the television thing. He turned and said, "Ted McKelvin shot him." Ted McKelvin was my father's first assistant, and he was the head of the Klan. Right? All the evidence disappeared. Right? And so there was they burnt crosses on the churchyard that I went to church in, that was 3 blocks away from where I lived. All the civil rights marches went across what would have been my front yard. Missed it by 2 weeks, which I'm very fortunate for. But all of the hatred that was existing in the town, that was boiling underneath, was very much a part of my experience. Yeah, I mean, not that I understood it all consciously, but it was a part of the experience. Then we moved up to another place, a place called Port Townsend, and it was a small town in Washington, near Seattle, a mill town that could have been West Virginia. It may have been one of the most incestual communities that's in America. It's a small mill town, and people were intermarried. Yeah, and the families were intermarried, and I was an interloper. And I knew that I didn't want to. You could see the history of people graduating from high school, and the only recourse that they had was to work in the mill. Yeah, only a few of us got out. Almost everybody was tied to the mill in some way. Yeah. Yeah. One of us got out and went into the Air Force. And then he invented a fishing lure company. I go fishing with him still. He's the only person that I have any relationship with. And I got out, right? Now, I got out for some kind of act of genius in the sense that I knew that my only way out was through athletics because it was never going to be academics. And I became a really, really good basketball player at a time in a small town where there were no other players to the level that I was at anywhere in the community. And I became an all-state player, and I was recruited by 10 or 11 major universities to go and play basketball. Yeah. Now, the initiative for that was an internal motivation that I can't tell you where that came from, right? And in that initiative, now I believe every one of us has this initiative within us in some way. Yeah. But in that initiative, there were also times when I was learning to play basketball. I'm 15 or 16 years old, which is a particularly potent time for kids. It's the best. If you want to brainwash a generation, then take them into an experience where emotionally they break and then feed them dogma. That's Nazi Germany to the T. Yeah, if you want to brainwash someone at the point where they're emotionally labile, and you provide them with a particular kind of emotional break, and then feed them with a particular dogma, then they'll assume the dogma. Yeah. So, but I had experiences when I was playing basketball where I can tell you that the world literally disappeared. I was so far into playing the game that my ability to sense myself as organized by the limitations that I have disappeared, and things happened that people had to tell me about afterwards because I didn't have a conscious recognition of what had taken place. So something happened that gave me a transcendental or transcendent sort of experience. And in 1964 in Port Townsend, Washington, who do you talk to? I mean, who could you possibly relate that to? Your parents? My parents? Who God love them. I mean, or whatever force, the great whatever that you want to use. My father's salvation came from being involved in his church because he had to have something. Had to have some redemption from his time in Korea that he couldn't talk about. Yeah. And it wasn't until 2 weeks before he died that he told anyone what he did in Korea. Yeah. Now, how are they going to have a view of the world that would include my experience? Yeah. And if you go back and you listen to Moshe, he'll tell you that he was worried for himself that he needed to be locked up in the mental case from his experience. Yeah. That one of his great fears was that he would be seen as psychologically unfit. Yeah. And to be outside of the paradigm. Yeah. Now, we're inviting people to be outside of their own personal paradigm. We're inviting people to transcend the gravitational field that they've known. We give a lesson, and for a moment, they enter into like a space capsule, and they reach an orbit that's above this gravitational field. And the question is the orbit going to decay back into the inertia? Or are they going to be pulled back by the society, by the family, by their friends, by the people around them who aren't really eager for them to change? Because if they change, they're either going to, if the person you change or anybody here changes, then the partner either has to come with them and grow themselves, or there's a separation. And if the person is in this orbit, are they going to be able to maintain the orbit or extend the orbit? Yeah. And we're saying that the evolution of each person to becoming a more human human means that the orbit has to continually be extended. Yeah? Which, in and of itself, is, it's not an easy place to be. Yeah? But we find a few people along the way that we recognize each other. We're friends with each other. And that's what it means in the Sufi world, the friends, or in the different world. We recognize there's a recognition of a particular. We get each other, yeah. And there are a few. In the Tibetan Buddhist process, the Tantric Buddhist process, it's called the short steep path. The short steep path means basically to go through the process of disidentifying with the way that you were engaged in life, the way you were conditioned, in a single lifetime. Right? Very short, very steep, and you find very few travelers on that path. Yeah? Now, I personally believe that every element that one needs for that level of personal transcendence is in this material. I don't think we have any teachers, myself included, who are yet mature enough to actually lead that charge, but we're edging towards that. Yeah, there's enough maturation and there's enough questioning in the world so that the method begins to have a different tone to it relative to the nature of transformation within the process, rather than the postural elements, where it hasn't decayed. It's just only gone to the place where the capacity of the people who've taken the work have been able to take it. And they have to go through years of their own growth before that which they could rely on, that was useful for them, that gave them a sense of meaning, leads them to the point of time that they can begin to transform themselves within the method and start to see, as they're working with people, that other outcomes are beginning to take place, and they begin to approach and support the other outcomes. Yeah? So, who knows? Maybe she'll talk to the group at some point in time. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's okay for me to be personal. I mean, just to tell you that this is the background I came from, and it's been all across the board, across my life. I mean, you ask, where did I have the 20% from? How did I escape Port Townsend? Yeah. Now I can tell you, I can tell you that I killed myself. Because when it wasn't basketball, I got to basketball, then it was other things in studies, and then it was Aikido, and then it was some other kind of training, or it was this or that, or getting a PhD, or then it was, all of these things were in this world of doing something to give myself a sense that I had something intact, that when I brought it into the world, I could have a sense of covering up some deep sense of inadequacy with myself. Yeah? And I was driven by the neurosis, which is the source for almost all creativity. Yeah? There's nothing wrong with being driven by neurosis. But you hope at some point in time that the neurosis leads one to the point of time that they can actually look at their life and have a sense of caring for yourself. Yeah? Because caring for that level of conditioning, that drive, is massively, massively unhealthy. I mean, it destroys human beings. Yeah? And so then to have something else, I mean, I think I told you, I mean, I had built this building. And by 1988, I graduated in 1984, I had a 9,000 square foot building. What is that? 300 meters? I don't know, whatever it is. Feet, big. We had Feldenkrais classes, yoga classes, Tai Chi classes, Aikido classes, Judo classes. We sponsored workshops and we sponsored a training. We had 4 different practitioners who were giving, one at craniosacral, 2 or 3 other Feldenkrais teachers. And at the point in time, I was giving between 30 to 40 lessons a week, teaching 7 to 10 classes a week, administering the building, and screwing up 2 relationships. Moshe had come along to me and kicked me in the toe and said, I take better care of you than you can take care of yourself. And I said, huh. let me show you what I can do. Until this, I saw this and realized I knew nothing about caring for myself. I only knew how to produce all this in order to give myself a sense of meaning. And I still have tinges of that. Yeah? I still have tinges of that, yeah? I mean, it's not, this whole thing that I'm developing in the States for this training process isn't to put my name on it. It's for a particular legacy, because I believe that there's something so profound in this work that it needs to come into the world with a different way and a different level of professionalism amongst the practitioners. And so I'm going to make a huge risk to jump into a void that hasn't been there before. Yeah, I might come really crashing and burning to the ground. This is really possible. Yeah. And I might pull a whole bunch of other people with me. That's also possible. Yeah, because the people in general who associate with me aren't necessarily well liked by other parts of our community. Yeah. So that's a problem. Yeah. Their ability then to go and work for other trainers has probably been cut in the way that we have professional dialogue and the way that we work as a community now. Hopefully that community, the rifts within the community can be healed. But it's really a lot of hard work. Yeah. And I have to say that I myself have been a major part of the rift. Yeah. So. Okay. So I don't know what use that was, but here we've had this conversation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Out of interest, all the people that did train at Amherst,
Yeah.
do you know, like, do you have an idea of the percentage of them that went on to be practitioners or really?
Yeah, there was the San Francisco training. Out of the 65 people, probably had 60 people that practiced. So
yeah.
they graduated. The 13 people that Moshe had as Israelis, when he first started training people, everybody practiced. Everyone had developed the ability to practice. In Amherst, I don't know exactly, but I would say over 50%.
Yep.
That over 50% of the people actually went, and there's a lot of people that are still in the work and actively yep. practicing the work. And I think that historically has been the case, because if you're touched by the genius of the Creator, that in some ways it invokes some internal magic within yourself, that there's some form of transmission that's given. Yeah. So. Yep. You agree? Okay.
I've never forgotten about it since I did 3 days of it in a course, and I could never get it out of my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can understand what you mean by the magic of it.
All right. We need to trade positions.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any technical question that you need a little demonstration on before we start, or is it you had enough to play with, and you know that if you're in your office and you're kind of stuck, that you could find the answer by going and looking at the skeleton before you go looking for, yeah? Before you call Jeff? No. I'm trying to work myself out of a job here. You guys have my phone number. Yeah.
It's on the website.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, go play. We want to have time for another investigation, an ATM investigation at the end. So give yourself about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, so we can come back and play with another ATM that again plays with some of the questions that we've been working with.